out in Zoom land. So I'll read off names as I see them, and we can go from there. Just say hi, or whatever you want to say. Camille, Korea.
Hello, good morning. Camille Correa with the Nashua Transit System. Thank you.
Thanks, Camille. Mac.
Mac Pavir from NHDES.
Mac. Nick.
Nick Germain, Wilton, New Hampshire.
Thanks, Nick. Jen Beauregard.
Hi, Jen Beauregard, Town of Pelham.
Thanks, Jen. And Christy. You know what town she's from?
I think Amherst.
Christy, are you there? All right, we'll move on. And we'll go to Dan.
Dan Hudson, City of Nashua.
Wayne Husband, City of Nashua.
Ben Grader, Town of Hudson.
Lavena Kinchi, City of Nashua. Jared Pretzer, Town of Merrimack.
Jonah Marcel, Regional Mobility Manager here at NRPC.
Okay. Mary Brundage, NRPC. Emma Rarick, NRPC.
Kelsey Cashin, NRPC.
Rob Borowitz, NRPC.
Mark Chamberlain, Town of Limber. Will Luke, Amherst.
Salem Quinn, Administrative Communications Coordinator here at NRPC.
And Matt Watkins, MPO Coordinator here at NRPC. And props to Mary, who this is her last TTAC meeting here, because she's moving on to other pastures. So thanks for everything, Mary. Appreciate it. All right, so we're going to have to table the approval of the September minutes. We don't have a visual forum. And we'll move on to the safety target setting for calendar year 2026. I am going to go through that, and the goal is to get just a consensus that the TTAC supports those targets. So I'm gonna, let me see here. Share my screen. That. And I'm going to go ahead and slideshow going from the beginning. Can someone out there, Camille, can you give a thumbs up that you can see this presentation? Okay, great. So there is a memo in your agenda packet about these safety targets, attachment 2, and that gives, kind of a level of detail that you can follow along with. And this presentation kind of summarizes that and generally follows along with it. So you can pay attention to that or both. So, and this is what we're going to be talking about. A lot of you have seen this before over the years, because we've been adopting safety measure targets for a while now. There is a little twist to it this time, so we'll talk about that. So I'm going to talk about the background of where this all came from, why we're doing it, what the measures are, where the data we use to develop the measures, and then again our target development. I'm proposing we change that a little bit. Talk about the targets for next year, and then kind of what it all means, that assessment of significant progress. So in 2016, Federal Highway Administration, they adopted and published the final rule for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and that required departments of transportation, including the Hampshire DOT, to set safety performance targets by the end of August of 2018. MPOs, including NRPC, were required to have targets 180 days after that. And so MPOs can adopt their own regional targets, or they can adopt state targets. In that first year in 2018, we did adopt DOT's targets. And then that very next year in 2019, we transitioned to our own targets. It makes sense because there's data available for regional crashes. So we wanted to do specifically use our own data for this region. And then we adjust them each year and set targets for the following calendar year. These are the 5 measures. So there's the total number of persons suffering fatalities as a result of motor vehicle crashes. And this is all calendar year testing. There's the rate of fatalities, and that's the number of fatalities divided by 100 million vehicle. It's per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. So that's a way to normalize the data for comparison reasons. There's also the total number of serious injuries, the rate of serious injuries, and that's also per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And then the 5th measure is the number of non-motorized fatalities and non-motorized serious injuries. So basically, those are the bike ped fatalities and serious injuries, and we just do the total for that. We don't do a rate. So, any questions on the actual measures? What we measure? Okay. So these are the data sources. There's the Fatal Analysis Report System called FARS. That's where we get fatal data information. You actually get that. Whereas you can go online and there's a dashboard for that. We actually get the specific New Hampshire data from the Department of Safety. The serious injury data comes also from the Department of Safety. The Department of Safety collects that for the state, so that's what we get that. And then we get vehicle miles traveled from the Highway Performance Monitoring System, which is that data. It's collected by DOT with help from the NRPCs, and that vehicle mile travel data is what we use to calculate the rate. So where all that comes from. Just regarding that VMT information, as you've heard many times here, Tyrell kind of leads that here, and we collect our own data and we submit it to DOT. So it's one of the applications for that data. Let's see. So to develop these targets, again, there's some guidelines and rules. So Federal Highway, and their goal is to achieve significant reduction in traffic fatalities and serious injuries, and that's all described in their HSIP program, and then there's associated information, and some of those links are in your memo. So the bipartisan infrastructure law added 2 long-range goals, and that was under their Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program, which NRPC participated in with the other MPOs in the state. You might remember that. So those long-range goals are a 50% reduction in fatalities by 2035 and 0 fatalities by 2050. So we participated in that grant program. We have a safety action plan was adopted in 2025, and so that's the goal of that plan. So our policy has been, it is to prevent traffic-related deaths and significant injuries system-wide, to also ensure that the targets are data-driven, they're realistic, they're achievable, and then what we really should be adding is this goal for our safety action plan, which is, again, that 50% reduction by 2035 and 0 fatalities by 2050. So what I'm trying to say here and recommend is that we want to go ahead and adjust our policy to include those long-term goals for the safety action plan. So here's the existing way we set our targets, and that is we calculate from the data that we get from the Department of Safety. We calculate the most recent 5-year moving average for crashes and a longer term trend for crashes. And that's traditionally what we've been doing. We compare the two, whichever one's lower is our goal for the next year. So now, because of that additional goal from the safety action plan, we're proposing that we compare, instead of those 2 metrics, there's 3 metrics: 5-year moving average, longer term trend, and then the target that from the safety action plan. And I'm going to show you, and whichever one is lower, that's the one we're proposing that we adopt each year. So I just wanted to show you, using fatalities information, how we kind of build, that argument. So this is the total fatalities going back to 2014. The absolute number plotted, obviously on the XY graph. This is the 5-year moving average laid on top of that. And you can see that the most recent moving average includes data up to 2024. That's our most recent data. So the most recent 5-year moving average is 11. Then this is the best straight line, laid on there, that represents the long-term trend from 2014 through the most current data, which is 2024, and it's projected out to 2026. So that's how we've traditionally, built this argument. And this is a little bit of a side dive here. So if we're going to be including safety action plan goal of in 2035 and 2050, what I went ahead and did is just did a simple straight line calculation out into the future. So it took 11 is the most current 5-year moving average. I divided that by 2 to get a 50% reduction out in 2035. So that's 5.5 crashes in fatalities in 2035. And then I just did straight line kind of math between the two. And what that means, so if you do that in 2026, the target from using this methodology would be 10 fatalities. I talked to the other MPO coordinators and our partnering for performance committee, talked about this, and this seemed to be a consensus way to do it. So that's the safety action plan target for 2026 would be 10. How are people feeling about that? I mean, it's legitimate math. It's simplistic, but that's kind of the way we figured we do it. So if you lay that all back onto our number of fatalities graph, you can see there's the 5-year moving average of 11, the trend of 10 out through 2026, and then the safety action plan target for 2026, which would be 10. So if the methodology is to compare the 3 and take the lowest, the 2026 target would be 10 fatalities, because that's the lowest of the 3. So that would be the proposed target for fatalities. So if you continue that for the rate of fatalities, again, there's the 5-year moving average, the trend, and the safety action plan. In this case, the lowest of the 3 is that safety action plan target of 0.573 fatality rate in 2026. So that would be the target. Moving on to the number of serious injuries. Of the three, the longer term trend of 2024 to 2026 is 48.9 serious injuries, and that's the lowest of the three. So that would be the target. For the serious injury rate, again, those are the three measures. And once again, that longer term trend of 2.911 serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles traveled would be the target because it's the lowest of the three. And then finally, the non-motorized bike head fatalities and serious injuries. Once again, that trend, which is 3.9 fatal and serious injuries, is the lowest of the three. So that would be what we would choose as the target for bike head fatalities and serious injuries for 2026. And I know in the memo I put the summary table first, but thought I put it after this this presentation of the graphs. So in yellow are the targets. Again, 10 fatalities in 2026 would be the target. Fatality rate of 0.573 per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Target 48.9 serious injuries. 2.911 serious injury rate, and then 3.9 bike head injuries or fatalities. So that's the summary, and I have a little more to talk about here, but does that make sense so far? Any questions? Yeah, Dan.
So a couple things. One does this exclude turnpike crashes or is it all included as part of our regional?
Yeah, it's all included.
Okay, so some of that we don't have control over in the region maybe.
Right, yeah. And yeah, that's a really good point, and we'll talk a
I
little
mean,
bit.
certainly when you're averaging out over millions of vehicles miles, then that's gonna impact that quite a bit because of the volume on the turnpike. The other thing I would just note is that other than pedestrian crashes, everything's up pretty significantly since 2021. I understand why we do the moving average. All these averages seem pulled down somewhat by what was occurring during COVID. Having said that, the trends are down if you include all that data. And I think it's important to set aggressive goals to try to reduce these fatalities and injuries. But if you just look at the most recent data, then it's kind of troubling because things seem to be on the rise. So that's common, I guess, in the question.
Yeah.
And this is not something I'd expect you to have right that moment, but would we be able to see from prior year targets if we met them or didn't meet them? And if so, by what the plus or minus is on that?
You know what? That's a really good question, and I can show that. I have a table, and Emma and I talked about this, and we can look at that today. And we were thinking there are probably better ways to show it graphically, but we can look at that in a second if you want.
Yeah, because the thought would be if we're well exceeding goals repeatedly,
Yeah.
maybe we can try to be a little bit more aggressive. But if we're not meeting goals currently, well, something needs to change there if we're consistently failing it. So.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks. Will.
A couple of things. Does the trend line, the green line, does that have to be linear or straight?
Well,
I mean, because the reason why it's, like it was pointed out over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been climbing in fatalities, but the trend is going down. Which doesn't sort of make sense to me, but do we know, there are 13 fatalities last year, 14 fatalities this past year. The question I have is, what do we do to lower that? Can we do anything, or is it just up to poor driving, or because you don't want next year to have that even climb? Is there any reason why we're going up after all this work on our roads is
Yeah,
just curious.
yeah, well, a couple things. Who knows why the rate is going up is a combination of things. And, you know, what we can do about it is a good question. You know, we do, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but we do, you know, keep track in our TIP and our long-range plan of how much funding we're investing in so-called safety projects, right? And you know, as a MPO, we just do the planning. You know, we help, you know, identify those projects. So maybe moving forward, one of the things we might be able to do is when we do go ahead and solicit new projects, we have criteria for that, and we weight that criteria. One of the criteria is safety measure. Maybe we weight that higher so that more safety-related projects are selected for our, you know, 10-year plan type of thing. Another thing, maybe we could have some sort of, you know, project where we come up with an education program for the region. I don't know. I'm certainly open to suggestions how it's an MPO we could impact, you know, safety on our roads, because, you know, it's hard to impact poor driving behavior.
And I ask this question every year. Is there any data on the impact of using, I mean, cars as we graduate to more collision avoidance? Is there any data that says, hey, that stuff is helping or not? You know, for about 3 or 4 years, I've been asking that question.
Right. And we asked that at the
DOT, whenever they were here.
Yeah, that's pretty recently, and they didn't have any data on that just yet.
And that one last question I have, the 14 fatalities in, what was that, 2014 or 2024? Is there hotbeds of areas that, or where is the majority of those 14 fatalities for that year? Is it on Route 3? Is it back roads? Is it, that'd be an interesting.
Yeah, we talked about that, and I think that's a step beyond this, where we can look at that, and for the next time we do go ahead and solicit projects, we'll have that.
Yeah, because that may help you decide in the long range planning that maybe we ought to focus in this area to reduce.
Definitely. Yeah, that's the next step. Well, that's a very good point.
Okay, thanks.
So kind of to your guys' questions. So this is, you know, what are the ramifications type of thing. So it's, you know, Federal Highways calls this the assessment of significant progress. So Federal Highways does directly assess what New Hampshire DOT is doing, if they are meeting or not meeting their targets. And if they don't meet targets, then there's that Highway Safety Improvement Program funding. It impacts that, and how it impacts it is that DOT can flex, so-called flex, various pots of funding, including the safe HSIP funding. And if they don't, they're allowed to flex that funding, but they don't. They actually use all of their HSIP funding is used for so-called safety projects. They would be allowed to flex up to 50% of it, but they don't. So if DOT doesn't meet their targets, they wouldn't be allowed to flex that funding. But since they don't anyway, it doesn't really impact them. They also, and they didn't meet their targets for 2022. So the other kind of penalty was they had to develop a mitigation plan that shows how they are doing whatever they can to promote safety, you know, safety projects and so on. So DOT is directly assessed by the feds, that Federal Highways doesn't directly assess the MPOs. We don't get penalized if our region isn't meeting these targets. But where we do get evaluated is every 4 years, we do a certification review, federal certification review, and they look at our TIP and our long-range plan, and they look to see in our planning process how we're addressing safety. And the way we do that, so this is kind of planner speak, but so we do have targets for our region, all of our roads, right? We do in our plans integrate, our goals, these targets into our planning process. And in our TIP, we do have a description of all of our performance measures. There are others in addition to the safety measures. And in that, we do go ahead and list the safety projects and the amount of funding dedicated to those projects. And then we try to connect that back into, we just show that we are investing in those safety projects. And then in our long range plan, we have to do the same thing. So in those plans, we do the investments that are being made back into how those goals are being, or whether those goals are being met, if that makes sense. So, but that leads into the discussion about what can we do, type of thing. So I did. Oh, you know what? I took out that. Sorry, I took that table out. That answers your question. So what I can say is that I did look back at the targets all the way back to 2019, compared those to the actual outcomes, and in 2019 and 20, we actually did better than our targets. And I think 2021, our fatalities and our fatality rates were higher than our targets, but the other measures met the targets. And then I think in 23 and 24, our fatalities and serious injuries we did not achieve those goals in 2021, or in 2023 and 2024, we didn't meet those targets. So, but interestingly, since 2019, we have met the targets. We've exceeded the targets in a good way for all the bike head injuries and crashes. So,
just it doesn't need to be right now. The other thing I'd be curious to see is what is our total miles traveled, just for like how the rate is calculated.
okay.
Because I'd be curious to see, obviously, like with fatalities, the goal is 0, but if we're seeing large increases in total volume of traffic, even if the number of fatalities stays the same, that's still a better outcome due to its lower rate overall. So I'd be curious to see how that traffic is increasing throughout the region. I know, like specifically in Hudson, all of our traffic is increasing year on year pretty rapidly. So I'd be curious to see how that is region wide, and how that's kind of affecting because it looks like on paper our fatality rate is at least on average steadily dropping at a pretty reasonable rate. So I'd be curious just to see what that total increase is of traffic.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, one other question I have. Is there any data on these motorized bikes? Are there, is there many crashes, or is there? Because every time I go down to DC or New York City, it's a cluster. I mean, having all these bikes, the motorized bikes out there, and I'm sure we're going to get it in our footprint. I was just wondering if there's any data that DOT is collecting or we're collecting on these motorized bikes, and are they considered part of the bike PED environment or? Because they're unlicensed vehicles, right?
Yeah, there are different categories of the electric bicycles and that, so.
I just wonder if there's any concern or any data that's out there. That would
So
think-
they would be an electric bike would be captured as a bike had crash at this point.
Is there many in Nashville? But electric bikes? I mean, I'm just curious.
There's a few out there, but the city doesn't have any out right now. We will likely in the future though, possibly next year.
Nick Jermaine had a question.
Hey, Nick, you have a question?
Where are we at overall with are we completely recovered from COVID as far as like traffic count numbers now? I know a couple years ago it looked like we were still catching up, but is there a general consensus on whether we're back to pre-COVID levels now?
We're close. I don't know the exact number and how close we are. I don't know if Tyrell does off the top of your head, but yeah, not sure, but most of the way back, I would say.
Yeah.
But I can definitely get that number for you.
And I don't know, the more I see some of these numbers, I mean, it seems like we're jumping back up a little bit from some of the metrics that were, closer. And I'd be interested in seeing a trend line, I guess, between those two numbers, I guess, when we're and overall, I guess I think when I look at stuff like this, I definitely share some of the concerns that I think our colleague from Amherst in Nashua had was that I don't know, I get a sense that performance of what projects and stuff like that get installed is something I'm interested to seeing if there's like a real connection with effectiveness of what gets what's put out there in some capacity. I mean, I know that's difficult to assess sometimes, especially on some of the scales that we're dealing with, but I think that's something that interests me, I guess. And I know you need more targeted data about where things are happening and what's going on at the same time, but
Yeah, a next step, I think a good next step is to do that analysis and look at the hot spots for crashes and consider what infrastructure is there and see how we are performing. I think that's a good idea.
I guess the fear I have is that, a lot of money's been spent on some sections of, some safety improvements for certain parts. And obviously that probably has a positive effect, but how effective are those versus just the fact that there were less people going through for the past couple of years? And are we just going to see an increase to what it was before, I guess, for, some of those years after some of the major safety improvements were put in place?
Right, and what to people's point about what can we do, that project on the Milford bypass was really a collaboration between NRPC and DOT and then the communities. And I remember, that corridor study was done way back in the early 2000s. But I still remember it was several 10-year plan cycles ago that someone from Amherst, called me up and said, "Hey, this corridor study's been here. What are we doing about?" And there's funding that's dedicated to that segment of the road. What's going on with that? And then, we ended up reaching out to DOT and the project manager, and then that dialogue happened. You guys might recall where, they retained the consultant, they did that, some more analysis, and then came up with that solution that was implemented on the bypass a few years ago. And that, you know, that was the result of analysis and, you know, and I guess it remains to be seen how that's improved the accident, you know, the accident rate or the number of fatalities out there. I'm not aware that there's been a fatality there since that improvement was made, but I think it's an example of how all of us here can impact, you know, I don't know, improvements. So I think that was a good example. Anywho, any other questions? So the recommendation, staff recommendation would be that that the MPO, our policy committee, adopt this updated policy to include that third measure and also adopt these targets for next year. So, you know, this is a proposed motion, and we would have to just, you know, we have a quorum overall, but not a physical quorum. But I think we can go ahead and do a consensus that the NRPC TTAC recommend adoption by the national MPO of the updated MPO policy and 2026 safety performance targets as discussed. And that was what I would propose as a consensus. And I guess I would go ahead and ask if anybody objects to this consensus, either in the room or out in Zoom land. So there's no objections to that proposal. Yeah, Tyrell.
I just have a comment, going back to what Nick asked about general traffic volume and stuff. I'm just kind of looking at what I can on the DOT's traffic count viewer, you know, platform. And in general, where statewide, I can't look at it per RPC on my phone, but statewide in general, we're at, you know, about traffic volume about what we were at 2017 from this very basic look that I'm getting at right now. So comparing it to before COVID, after COVID, you know, and that's going to depend on the towns and the sites. So, you know, this is a very broad way to report on that, but you know, I just want to respond to that.
All right. So I don't hear any objections to that consensus to adopt this policy and these targets. So thank you. Good discussion. Anything else on that? All right. So moving on to the agenda. So the next item is a discussion about our next on-call consultant selection process. Emma and I are going to kind of tag team this, but I as you guys recall that, you know, every time there's a 10-year plan cycle, we need to select projects, and typically the last few cycles we've retained an on-call consultant to help us review the scope and cost of potential projects. So we are, whereas we're not sure what's happening with the next 10-year plan round of project selection, we do think it's valuable to nonetheless have an on-call consultant. And we are just getting ready to start the RFQ process. And Emma, will you have any thoughts on that, or will you just?
Yeah, just that we'll be releasing the RFQ, we hope the end of this week. We'll be reviewing submittals probably the first couple of weeks of January. And we are still looking for 2 more reviewers to help us with that. Will has already volunteered. Thank you for that, Will. So if anybody's interested, we're looking for 2 more. And like Matt said, typically we use the on-call engineer to review potential projects for the 10-year plan. But as you probably recall, with this 10-year plan cycle, they didn't add in the projects that we selected last time. Statewide, they didn't add in the projects that were selected by the RPCs. So we're not sure if those projects will be added in the next time or if they're gonna ask us to do another selection process. So if we don't do another 10-year plan selection process, select a whole new batch of projects, then we'll be looking at what other projects or what other things we could do with this on-call engineer. So there could be some opportunity there, depending upon what happens with the next 10-year plan selection process.
Yeah, so. Yeah, what was I gonna say about that? Yeah, for that, whether or not there's another round of project selection, whether or not DOT wants us to do that, we do intend to go ahead and reach out to our communities and see and just review what we already know to be project priorities and just make sure those priorities are still there and fine tune those to some degree. And so there'll be some sort of project review process next year, whether there's a 10-year plan selection process or not, so.
How did the last on-call consultant do performance-wise as far as?
How they do?
Yeah.
Well, so they did their thing, came up with cost estimates and reviewed scope. And then all of that, right, and then we selected our projects, then we submitted them to New Hampshire DOT, and then DOT does their internal review. And in several cases, the cost estimate by the consultant was significantly different than what DOT said. So
Higher? Higher?
typically the DOT was much higher.
The Nest last year, was it?
Mhm.
Was it the Nest last year?
It was VHB, yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows that, the reasons for that. DOT suggested, that VHB, probably didn't know there were certain details they didn't know about, what was within, the area of the project and so on and so forth. So, yeah, that was a concern.
But their goal was to make the project cost more realistic, I assume.
Mhm.
It couldn't hurt having them make the submissions more realistic, I assume.
Oh, yeah, it's a good process. It's valuable, and we're gonna do it again. So the reason we brought it up today is to give you a heads up, to remind you that next year we're gonna do some level of project selection to be determined exactly the details of how that's gonna work. In the meantime, rather than, scrambling in the end and selecting an engineering firm later, we wanna do it sooner. And again, you don't have to decide today, but we are looking for 2 more individuals from this committee to help with that selection.
Well, not to put the cart too far ahead of the horse, but some of the projects that fell out from the last, I'm told from good sources that if you had a project that was in the loop, that got tossed by in the process, that you should probably continue to wholeheartedly push for those projects, because it doesn't mean the projects weren't worthy. It's just that for funding reasons, they had to make cuts somewhere. So.
Yep. Don't give up, Wayne.
No, well, it's hard not to, because you go through a process, and you go through a process here.
Mm-hmm.
We had a project that was fairly limited in scope, I think. I think all the regions here in this group voted for it to be like one of the top priorities in the region. And when it hit the DOT, not to be too critical, but the project just kind of falls out of nowhere. There's no notification given, just the fact that the lack of funding. And I respect that, but I mean, to some degree, it kind of destroys that mantra where they're trying to talk about how they really believe in the bottom-up decision-making process, because you got a bad taste in my mouth more than once in the past year, that bottom-up planning process getting thwarted by individuals at the very top. It wasn't pretty. I'm talking about the Merrimack project in particular now, when it hit a certain butter right to the governor's office, and from there it went right out the door. That's really not how the process is supposed to work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all of the
but I don't think we ought to give up on Exit 5. I think it's been a very difficult safety problem. It's just waiting for a fatality to happen. We always said it's gonna be unfortunate if a fatality does happen to make that project happen. We pushed that for so long and so hard that it looks like that's the way that's gonna go, unfortunately. And I understand some of the philosophy too, because you have a worse problem up in Manchester at exit 6, where you get off at that Amoskeag Bridge exit, you're going up the turnpike, and all of a sudden, if you're not careful, your front fenders in the back of a car could have little to no warning, there's cars backing up to the I understand that, but now that traffic volumes are coming back from COVID, we're looking at a very similar situation where traffic could back up on that turnpike and people could get rear-ended by a car going 75 miles an hour south. It's not pretty. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. I'm not a big proponent of playing the death card. I hear it too often. Who knows?
Yeah, thanks, William. Ben, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if more reviewers are needed, I'm happy to jump in and help with that process as needed.
Good, thank you. Will?
Yeah, just a quick question. I think the involvement that we did, when was it, a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago? The one that VHB is on now. We allocated what, $60,000 or $80,000 for the entire contract, right? That was the ceiling.
Right, it was 75,000.
Or 75, right. Is that about the same amount this go around?
It's 70,000 this time.
Oh, 70,000. And I gave to Emma my input for the RFQ about past performance, and it hits right with what you were mentioning about how well did the current contractor perform. Is there anything that can be ferreted out with their performance based on another solicitor? So hopefully, did that get into the?
Yeah, we're gonna make a couple tweaks.
Okay, good, good. And yeah, it's a good process that we have here, I think, of evaluation. It's very thorough and very good. I like to do it.
Good. All right, any other questions about selecting an on-call consultant?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot this question. Can we, within that $70,000 in the RFQ, does it have to be strictly for the 10-year plan?
No.
So we could put a requirement in to have, an independent study on analysis of this fatality data. I mean, that would be a good topic for somebody to look at.
Well,
I mean,
I don't know about the exact project, but there is a kind of catch-all in there for other projects.
Other
Would probably be though to evaluate an infrastructure project.
Right.
I think, other studies we could probably do through other kind
For
of
other, besides
other
using.
things in our UPWPN.
Okay. That's it,
Mark.
I think that's it.
Having been through that process the last time, thing that I found really annoying was that DOT took our analysis, we then sat down and decided to choose from the top two. And because of the numbers, they ignored our recommendations. So I would be careful about how you rate the requirements this time.
Right.
Because it was very disheartening to make a decision based on our needs, then the DOT just overrode it.
Yeah, that was a function of our scoring. We had laid out how we were going to score and rank the consultants, and it really was the top ranked based on our there was a number that came out of everybody, all the individuals that scored, the consultants, and it was a straight number, and that's how we laid it out, and that's what we had to stick to. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would look at the weighting on that. There are some things were weighted heavier than I think they should have been, but I mean, and that's how we ended up where we ended up.
Right.
So.
Okay. Great. Anything else on the on-call consultant discussion? All right. So moving on, last main topic. And this is, we haven't been talking about the minor revisions for a while. There's no action required by the TTAC regarding minor revisions, but I did want to, and moving forward, I want to make this group aware of the monthly minor revisions. And so very similar to the TIP amendments, right? Something becomes a TIP amendment when you exceed a certain threshold. Below that threshold, if you change a project, it's a minor revision. So, and there's a longer list of criteria for minor revisions than there is TIP amendment. But the ones that are impacted this month are minor changes, less than 25% total cost of the project, changes in the funding category, and a change in the fiscal year of any phase of a project. So just kind of quickly, and most of the time with these, communities know about this before we even do, right? Because they're working with DOT, and they're right in that loop. So there are just a few local projects, and these are listed in your memo, but I would add that a couple more were added since that memo went out. So there's the Nashua project, 41586, that's Walnut, Chestnut, and Central Streets, that improvement of all that area. And the changes are, there's a funding source change in 2026. And also the construction phase is moving from 2026 to 2027. Project 41742 is the Heritage Rail Trail East. And there's an additional year of preliminary engineering being added, and then associated additional funding. And again, it's a small amount of funding. That's why it's a minor revision. So on the Everett Turnpike, project 13761 that's the catch-all for design and right-of-way acquisition. So both the preliminary engineering phase and the right-of-way phase have minor adjustments in the funding estimate in 2027 and 2028. This is also the Everett Turnpike widening. This is the B project, and this is specifically the bridges in Merrimack, Wire Road over and Babusick Lake Road. And the changes are, again, minor adjustments in the funding estimate for FY 26, 27, and 28. And Merrimack is aware of that. I did again, I've reached out to all the communities that are impacted, and so they're all aware of these adjustments. So in Pelham, 16145 on Main Street, it's a bridge and culvert replacement over Beaver Brook. Again, change in preliminary engineering funding source in 2025, and some minor changes to funding for preliminary engineering, right-of-way, and construction. And the last project is also in Pelham. This is the project 41715A. It's a roundabout at Mammoth Road and Marsh Road, and the construction phase is moving from FY 25 to 26. And I think that's, again, there's no action required by the TTAC or the MPO. I wanted you to be aware of those, and let's see the chat.
Yeah, these changes are DOT leveled changes. Correct.
So what's the question, Will?
These changes, they're downward directed from DOT.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And usually they're working directly with the communities, and the communities know about these usually anyway.
Now, with these changes that come down, does our contractor that we have look at those changes or not? No, there's no need.
No. Once the projects are in the tip,
Then
they're off the hook at that point.
Good.
So are there any questions on the minor revisions? All right, very exciting. All right, I don't have any other NRPC updates. Donna, what do you got?
So the next meeting of the Greater Nashua Regional Coordination Council for Community Transportation is November 20th. That's a little bit different than what it usually is. Usually it's the fourth Thursday, but I don't think anybody wants to meet on Thanksgiving. So it's a week ahead. And also it looks like there won't be, at this point, Jared, if you want to just pass it on. It looks as if there won't be a December meeting at this point. So we will let you know. So if you could post that in your town halls, that would be really appreciated. And if you get any calls about transportation for residents, please direct them to me, the email. So thank you.
Thanks, Donna. All right, we can go around the room, and I'd like to know if there's any municipal updates. Anybody from any of our communities that wants to say anything?
For Nashua and Hudson, we're wrapping up the Route 111 bridges rehab project over the Merrimack River. Everything's done except for replacing the lights, which we're trying to get added in through a change order to the contract. But everything else is done. So thanks for everybody's patience on that. I know was a little disruptive at times with traffic flow. But yeah, that's what I have. Good.
Wayne or Ben or Levent or Jared or Mark, anything you want to bring up? Will?
Pass.
You're gonna pass? Let's see, how about Nick?
I got nothing right now.
Good. All right. Hey, Jen, anything you want to bring up?
Just that our Mammoth and Sherburne roundabout is complete with just a couple minor items left, and it's running great. Everyone loves it. We haven't gotten any complaints. No more backing up on Sherburne Road.
Wow. Dang. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Christy. Christy's busy, and Shannon. Okay, Shannon, I see you're trying, but didn't hear you.
Nothing for me, thank you.
I think DES dropped off and I don't see DOT or any of the other agencies. So I think that's
DES did post an update in the chat.
okay.
Mac apologizes. They had to drop off for another meeting. But they are speaking at the NHMA conference about their VW trust funded programs, and they gave a link on where to register for that.
Excellent. So that concludes the agenda items that I'm aware of. Anybody have anything else they want to talk about? Okay, all right. I think we can say that the consensus is we are adjourned. And thank you very much. And we do intend to have a meeting in December.
There was something wrong.
Thanks, everybody online.
We ranked